Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel, and here we are with a quality faith build. I don't know any other way to really describe it. We are mostly a martial character who has access to incantations. Most of our damage is coming from faith, but we have a good enough amount of strength and dexterity to wield the weapons we like. There's a couple things you could do to the build. You could probably take up to 10 points out of faith and it'll still perform quite well. And you could also take probably 2 to 4 points out of dexterity to file them where you need, depending on the weapons you like to use, if you plan to use it. And I had a good time with this build. I didn't think it would happen, but it did. I used the Magma Worm curved sword mostly as the core of this build. It's just the weapon I kept going back to. It had everything I needed out of it. It had the hyper armor, it had hit priority out of hit stun. It did the good damage, it was fun to use. Magma Guillotine, when you do happen to hit it, is very tasty. And I would recommend you play with it yourself. I went into this build with the mindset of, oh, I should use the Fire Whip, the Giant's Braid. I went out to eat with some friends, and I looked at one of them and I said, hey, give me an idea for my next video. It'll be funny or whatever for you to just throw an idea at me and I'll make it work. And he said, use the Giant's Braid. And I'm like, well, I'll try to use the Giant's Braid. And I didn't use it as much as I would have liked as a primary weapon or catching people with the Ash of War. It's really hard to hit Europeans with the Ash of War. But when you do get it to connect, it's tasty and it works well. And I use it mostly as a sidearm to finish people off, especially in conjunction with the Magma Worm curved sword, because the chasing is a little easier with a whip than it is with a curved greatsword, at least in my opinion. Now, if you want to have more success than I did with the Giant's Braid, in terms of using its Ash of War to deal damage to people, groups of people, it has quite the startup. Use Endure first on another weapon and then soft swap to it, or if you're really cool, do the hard swap. But yeah, you can use Endure, then soft swap, and use the Ash of War, and it'll work quite nicely. Now, there is something you should need and ought to be aware of if you yourself decide to make a fire martial build, and I think this will be applicable whether you're using faith or strength as your primary stat. Fire is kind of a middling damage type. There's, at least at meta levels, a lot of people are going to have fairly decent fire resistance. Their armor's going to help out. Their flat defenses from leveling are going to help out. Sometimes the environment is going to help out. Anytime it's raining or people are rolling in water, they're going to have greater fire resistances. There are things you can do to offset it, though. You can have the fire mix in with your Wondrous Physic. You can use Flame Grant Me Strength. You could probably use Golden Vow. Flame Grant Me Strength is a great option. It gives you fire and physical damage, which, lo and behold, for a martial fire build, that's what you're doing. But with Flame Grant Me Strength, be aware it doesn't last very long, so either you're going to have to reapply it often, or really get your damage in the first exchange or two with your opponents. There's a lot of other boons that you get for using a faith build as opposed to the strength variation of a build like this, I would say. For one, you get access to a bunch of incantations that you don't necessarily need for damage, just all the buffs. Black Flame Protection for that physical damage resistance. You can get Blessing's Boon or the Blessing the Erdtree, the two health restore incantations. You can pick either one, depending on how much FP you're comfortable using. I prefer the middle one. It feels like it's Bestial Vitality, then Blessing's Boon, then Blessing the Erdtree in terms of potency. I think Blessing's Boon is the most economical, but of course Blessing of the Erdtree gets you the most health back per tick. So, depends on what you need and what you want. You also get access to all the specific elemental resistances that you can get all those incantations to make it so you have a ton of magic or holy or lightning resistance depending on your needs, or even fire resistance, who knows. So you get access to all of those things. 60 faith is no laughing matter. You can use the Godslayer seal, and I think that'll have the highest incant buff scaling, or whatever it's called, the magic scaling for your spells. So if you wanted a few offensive spells, you could use them, and they would work quite well. They would work well enough. It wouldn't be optimal, sure, as like having 80 faith and using the appropriate seals. But 60 is still pretty good. You won't have the hugest mana pool if you follow my build exactly, but you can tinker with the points a little bit. Like I said, you could take up to 4 points, maybe even 5 points out of dexterity fairly comfortably. Depending on what weapons you use, you could pump that into mind. You could take a couple points from faith away if you wanted to put those into mind. You have options. You can just tinker with the stats a bit depending on what you like. If you want to be better than me, use those damage resist abilities. Use those regenerative abilities. If you're using, say, Blackfire Protection, then you could use one of the heal over time spells as well, since it nerfs your Crimson Flask healing a little bit, so you could pair those to kind of offset the debuff of the Blackfire Protection and just mostly get the pros and reduce the cons. So that's one of the biggest things that faith builds have going for them, at least the martial faith builds, is you have all of these tasty incantations that can really just accentuate the good points of your build. You get a lot of survivability. If you aren't going strictly with a fire build like I did, there's a lot more weapons you could be using. So for the strength I had and the faith I had, you could use the Ordovis Greatsword, for instance. It's mostly a strength weapon, I believe, but its Ash of War would hit pretty hard with that amount of faith. So you have options. You could use the Winged Scythe. There's lots of other weapons you could incorporate as well. Though, of course, if you wanted optimal damage out of those things, you'd probably lean a little heavier into the strength as well as the faith, and not be necessarily a quality build like I sort of did, a quality faith build. The neat thing you could do, and I haven't played with it so much, I don't know how good it would be, is for a lot of these weapons that have strength and faith scaling, it's like if you want the Ash of War to hit pretty hard, then you focus on the faith stat. If you want the general attacks to hit hard, you focus on the strength. So you could really invert the build and instead have 50 or 54 strength and then have like 30 or so faith, and you could still get a lot of the good stuff out of it, and then of course you'd have access to everything that faith builds get. There's a few instances while we're getting footage where I used great bow, and though I had the stats to use great bows, they weren't the most effective. They were effective if I needed to like pop somebody off a ledge or something like that, but just in terms of raw damage, they were a little less effective because I just have the minimum stats, or just above the minimum stats required for them. But if you inverted this build and did it mostly strength and some faith, then great bows would be very good, especially like the golem great bow and stuff like that. So much going on for this build. I like the outfit I came up with, and toot my own horn a little bit. I spent so much time talking about the premise of the build and everything it has going on, I haven't even been commenting on the footage, and hopefully you've noticed some stuff that you thought was neat. You have a great selection of weapons. You get access to the Giant Spray, you have the Magma Worm Curved Sword. You can use a good selection of weapons with just the Flame Art infusion. You can use the candle stand that I used in one clip that I was very proud of. I had a hard time hitting people with the Ash of War on the candle stand. It has a very long startup. If you do happen to hit people, it's surprising, right? But it's just getting to that point's a little tough. I don't know if you need to use Endure first necessarily to get it to function very well. That feels a bit time consuming, but Endure might be able to get you through the first couple seconds when you're getting it ready. But when you hit people, it hits them hard and it knocks them back. It's not nearly as effective as Black Flame Tornado. That'll win every time. Look at this rune acquisition. I don't know what level you are to drop 355k, but it's got to be close to max level. It might even be max level. I don't know off the top of my head. But just killing that AFK guy, getting that amount of runes was just silly to me. I couldn't help but point it out. This trio, I almost said, this trio could have been a little bit of a problem for somebody of my skill level, because they have a Rivers of Blood, they have a Moonveil Wizard, and then that guy I killed, he was holding the Bolt of Grandsack, so they kind of had the makings of a terrible 3v1 squad. Thankfully, none of them had an impressive amount of health, and so they were quite easy to deal with. It was only that really high level guy that had a decent health pool, and then again, he didn't have great armor on. He probably could have light rolled with even like medium armor on, so I don't know what he was doing when you're that high of a level. Who knows? It's not for me to know. But I like the candle stand. This guy, I think, might have gotten killed by that hit. I think that was a heavy. And I believe that with crate hammers, a one-handed heavy combos into a light attack. I don't know if it being a running heavy changes that at all, but I'm pretty certain at least the standing heavy into the light on a one-handed hammer combos, which is very silly to me. I'm learning about more combos that exist that I was previously unaware of. Just little ones like that. Things that weren't immediately apparent when the game first came out. It's like, I think the Irumi, which is the sword-shaped whip, I think if you hit somebody with the fully charged R2, it has enough hit stun that you can get a free light attack. I believe. I could be wrong on that one, but it seems like a thing that happens. It's just these things were not readily apparent what combos with what, just with the basic attacks. And it makes me wonder, who was the first to discover some of these things? How does it reach the community? And I'm sure there's people out there who do extensive testing and figure it out and are far brighter and more well-informed than I am. But that doesn't matter, because right now you're watching this poor fella get whipped to death. Look at this. I have never really played with whips. This was probably my first real foray into using whips, and I'm trying everything in my power to not use the dreaded term whip play for what that might evoke in your minds. Moving forward, I kind of like whips. People don't know what to do about them because they're not used all that often. It feels like I'm able to surprise people. The range is nice, and that's the biggest thing it has going for it. The standing attacks have good range, kind of like a spear. And so you can kind of outspace people if the internet's decent enough, and you can get some quality hits off on people. Just from a style point of view, I don't really like the concept of whips. To me, it's not the cool-looking weapon to use. But from a mechanical standpoint, whips fill a niche that's kind of interesting, and I wonder if I'll get around to incorporating it into more builds. I know I say something along those lines with every video, that I learned something or find out about something that I want to incorporate into future builds, and whether or not I actually do is subject to the whimsy and fickleness of man. But whips are a nice sidearm. Normally when I think of sidearms, I think of a dagger, or maybe punch claws, or maybe just normal punch weapons. Something that either hits fast or has decent range, you know, like a light rapier. But the whip wasn't a bad option either. You can kind of do the running attack, and with the startup animation, people might roll early and you might catch them that way. Things like that. And I liked it for just chipping away at people because it felt like a safer choice. The attack animations didn't take too long. I felt like I never over-committed with the whip too much. You need to get out of the habit of course, doing trades if you're used to that. But you treat it like any other light weapon, like a light rapier or something that doesn't necessarily get trades. And weaving in and out of combat, you can get some chip damage in, and I have nice things to say about whips now. And it's funny because there's some instances in this video where it feels like I shouldn't have hit with the whip, and I do anyways. And I felt that from the receiving end many times, where somebody swings a whip and I go, oh, I swear I would space that, but it's got this range that's hard to see because it's just this quick little thing flicking through the air. Oh, watch this. I get my R2 in at the same time as the invader does, and that guy just pops. Oh, you should run it back and watch it again. It did so much damage so quickly, and it was instantaneous. Oh my goodness. Oh, I think this is actually the clip that showcases that very concept where the whip has surprising range. Because it feels like when you think about the whip and the way they're flicking it outward, if they're not doing the side-to-side sweep, you know, that's more like a cone shape in front of you with your hitbox. If they're doing just the forward flick, it should be like a spear, right? So you imagine the hitbox would go forward like a tube or something like that. And that's where it would hit, is in a narrow band in front of the person like a spear. And I don't think it might actually be like that. I don't know. I would need to look into the frame data for whips. But there's some instances where this fella tries to strafe my whip towards the latter part of the fight, and I'm able to get hits that he probably didn't anticipate. And of course the internet wasn't phenomenal. I was trying to get an eruption hit with this clip and it didn't end up happening, but I ended up getting some good hits in with the Zweihander anyways before I end up switching to the whip overall. And it was a good little learning experience, understanding how these weapons might work. So whips might be a good sidearm of choice. Maybe if you don't like daggers or punch weapons, maybe it's something you should try out, my dear viewer. So if there's any less common weapons that you like, tell me about them. It's nice to see. It's nice to see, and it's even better to see the non-standard stuff winning against the meta stuff. And that's not to disparage people who like the meta. There's a reason it's there. It's functionally good, but it's sometimes neat when you can win with the garbage stuff sometimes. And I'm not saying whips or colossal swords are garbage. They're just not the best. They're not the upper echelon. So, not a moral statement, just kind of an observational one. But look at that. That flick somehow hit him, and it didn't look like from my perspective that it should have. Maybe it hit him on his screen, and that was just a latency thing. I don't know. The neat thing about this clip, though, moving forward, is the co-invader who shows up. So I guess a minor spoiler. But he shows up and bails me out of trouble. I get in over my head, and I was not thinking straight, and I wasn't certain exactly how to address the situation. This might have been... I don't even remember where this clip was in my recordings. The actual timeline has gotten jumbled in my attempt to entertain you, the viewer, so who knows. But trying to figure out the latency, what I can hit with, do I need to switch weapons, find out the blue doesn't have that much health and his armor is not too fantastic. Doing good enough damage against him, I should say. And the red shows up and blam, lightning bolt. Tosses that guy aside. I imagine the host is now on the retreat. And then another lightning bolt comes in and slams him again. And I get a hit, and then he gets hit by a third lightning bolt. And now the host is recovered, and it's a 2v1. And, oh my gosh, I haven't used the Bolt of Grand Sacks in a good while. It's been months. And I forgot what you're capable of when people are not looking at you. Which he really should have been. Maybe he was. I don't know. Paying attention to a guy with a curved greatsword at your neck at the same time you're getting hit with a Bolt of Grand Sacks does not sound like the best situation to be in. But I figured the internet latency was pretty bad, and so I decided to just poison this guy even though that's not what the build is meant for, and the poison, lo and behold, finishes him off. I feel that every time I have a build that doesn't have a poison option, it bites me in the rear end. It's just with those high latencies, it's like, what else can you do? I feel like I talk about this too much. So, we're going to move forward. Poison, good. Find a way to stick it on your build if you can. Quality versions of elemental builds seems the way to do it. I wonder if this same setup would work quite well for, say, have this similar stats in strength and dex. Not identical, but similar. And then having 60 or so in. I think I did a Magic Warrior build a little bit ago, so I think I've already done the other end of the spectrum, faith to intelligence. But I don't think I've done one that mostly has strength with a healthy amount of faith. I've done some that they have like the minimum faith requirements, I believe, but I don't think I've done one that's like 50-30 spread between strength and faith, so I'll need to look into this. But still, look at this. Switch into the whip, able to get those hits, and I don't get a last hit, unfortunately. However, when we switch back to the Magma Curved Sword, which I think we're about to in just a moment, I'm probably talking about it a little early, with this guy with the last hit of Flame Dance, which is entertaining to me. Able to reset, get the Magma Guillotine out, we hit him, and then we do the follow-up, and it actually connects, and there he goes. Oh, I don't show the rest of that clip because I get fog-walled, but still, finally get that Magma Guillotine hit, and it's as wonderful as I had imagined it to be. Well, in closing, I don't have much more to say, but I will say people usually use Flame with red mains wrong. As a PvE tool, it has been neutered completely, but as a PvP tool, you can free aim it because locking on will shoot it too low. And you can use it anytime there is a disengage to chase your opponent and hopefully get some free damage in, if not finish them off. Well, that's all for today, and I genuinely hope I see you in the next one. Bye-bye now.